OSS officers came from all walks of life and brought interesting life experiences and unusual skills to their work. It was in many ways a dream team that would never be seen again. A few used their status to their advantage, like Hollywood director John Ford, who used his easy access to cameras to gather information for the Allied forces. Moe Berg, a professional baseball player who played for a number of teams, including the Red Sox, helped the OSS with his fluency in many European languages. And movie star Sterling Hayden took his acting to the next level to go behind enemy lines in Yugoslavia. Other OSS operatives had backgrounds ranging from academics to entertainers, to circus performers and even swimmers and safecrackers. Men and women were recruited from all over the country. OSS is remembered for having a good record for recruiting and employing women.
Okay. Hopefully we're good on that. I was hearing all kinds of crazy echoes and weirdness going on, but
yeah, I had to unplug this light because you're right, everything's just going through the computer. So I'm going to have to just unplug this one light.
Okay. Well, we're here. We're going to try to get through it. Our subject of today faced much more hardship than we are right now. Definitely in his lifetime.
Well, he didn't have to put up with YouTube, so he didn't see that coming.
No, that's true. That's true. But he managed to persevere 100 years ago or so, and we're going to be covering this guy.
Yeah, that's the guy. You know, this is kind of like I was saying to you before. This is kind of like the story, two-part story, hopefully, of Curtis LeMay or Smedley Butler. These unsung American heroes who were sung then, but unsung now. Like this guy was quite the hero at the time, but because of political situations is not the hero anymore. So no one knows about this guy, and no one knows basically about Smedley Butler, and people have a dim view of Curtis LeMay. All of it because the left decided to go after them. And Donovan being part of that political situation, oddly enough, some political people on the left used him and some of them turned on him. But the reality of it is the guy was a gigantic American figure for 3/4 of a century. So, I mean, the fact that nobody knows this guy is astounding, but nobody does know him. And when they do know him, it's usually through the lens of the OSS, of which he ran. But even the OSS is at the end of his career. So he creates the OSS, he ends the OSS, and we'll get to the OSS in part 2. That's how big this freaking guy's life is, because it's just an amazing American story. Irish American out of Buffalo, born in 1883. This is, I guess, his dad up there. They're Irish, like working class Irish from Cork, and came over to Buffalo. It was like I think O'Donovan at first, and then they dropped the O, so it just became Donovan. Complete Irish or working class peasant stock. Ends up really from Toronto through Canada. They come in through Ireland, end up in Buffalo, New York. People don't know where Buffalo, New York is. You really don't want to go there. I once went. I've been in Buffalo in the winter. There is no reason to ever go to Buffalo, New York. I know there's Bills fans who watch this channel, and I don't know how you people live. I mean, Buffalo has now become some insane outer regions of Siberia, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, they actually housed refugees in their house too.
Well, they were using the. As a side note, they were using the university system, State University of New York at Buffalo, in the summer to put the African illegal aliens in the dormitories. And when the kids came back to school in late August, early September, they freaked out because the dormitories were filled with Africans cooking goats and knitting thatched huts in the dormitories. And they used the university system to take advantage of this. And the dean, to her credit, a black woman, said, "This is untenable. They got to get out." It was a security threat. They were, chasing the women around who were students. This past year, I'm talking about this past September. This just recently happened up in Buffalo. But that being said, Buffalo is a weird place, and he wanted to get out of Buffalo. So he went to a place called Columbia University in New York. At Columbia University, he becomes a star football player, a lead academic. He goes to Columbia University and then the law school, Columbia Law School. At Columbia University, he becomes the star quarterback just on the weekends. He goes to the law school with an obscure guy who he never really met, despite the fact that the guy says he knew him. He says he never met him in his life or would never hang out with him in a million years. That's FDR, of course, in the middle. Franklin Delano Roosevelt went to the same Columbia Law School class that William Donovan went to. Donovan would say numerous times later that he wouldn't be caught dead with FDR. FDR being, this elite, wealthy, guy who operated in different circles than Donovan did. Donovan being a scholarship student at Columbia, and FDR just dancing through there when he still had his legs. I don't know if he had polio yet, but he will. But Donovan called him a lightweight. They will later become extremely close friends, but that is a strange bedfellow situation that we also saw with Smedley Butler, also with Curtis LeMay, although LeMay and Kennedy did butt heads. They were a lot closer than the left would allege Kennedy and LeMay to be. These are two guys that actually did get along, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So this guy, William Donovan, is really fascinating because he goes to Columbia Law School, graduates in like 2 years instead of 4 years. Turns out that he is super handsome, takes acting, takes part in acting plays, wants to be a movie star, has these incredible bright blue eyes. Women fall in love with him. He is like 5'9", 5'10", but it's pretty big for that time. There weren't that many 6'5" people. And he gets out of Columbia Law School, goes back to Buffalo, and gets to work with a law firm up in Buffalo. And then he starts dating women in Buffalo, and he marries a woman named Ruth Rumsey in 1914. And Ruth Rumsey is a Protestant. Keep in mind that he is Catholic as Catholic comes, and she is the wealthiest Protestant heiress in Buffalo, New York, for what that's worth. There's a lot of industry up there in Buffalo with Lake Erie and everything else. So he marries her, and Ruth Rumsey becomes Mrs. Donovan. It doesn't stop Donovan from wanting to get out and do what he wants to do, which is go to war. Donovan will never care about money. He doesn't have to because he's got her to begin with. So this is a guy who really doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about anything except what he cares about, which is patriotism and Catholicism. And he was supposed to be a priest in the family, but they had a brother who became a priest, so he didn't have to do that. 1909, he joins the law firm, and in 1912, he reforms a National Guard unit, which is going to be an extension of the Fighting 69th. And the Fighting 69th is an Irish brigade in New York that goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War, very famous in the Civil War. It's an all-Irish American brigade, and he's handpicked to lead this brigade by certain forces, including Father Duffy, who is going to come into play in this story, and Douglas MacArthur, who is also involved in this. This is James Cagney in the production of the Fighting 69th. That's after World War I. I think George Brent is the guy that plays Donovan. George Brent is an actor, very famous, who actually, George Brent, oddly enough, there's a weird little trivia, was an American actor, but he was Irish, and he was involved in gun running and the IRA and everything else for years. A handsome guy. Ended up being involved in political gun running and stuff involving the Irish Republican Army years later. So in 1916, he takes this group, and where do they go? Like Smedley Butler, they go to fight Pancho Villa. Apparently, everybody fights Pancho Villa. They go down to Mexico. I don't know if he ran into Smedley Butler or not, but he takes his regiment down there to fight Pancho Villa in the Mexican-American War, or the Mexican crisis, or whatever they want to call it there, involving corporate interests that were in Mexico that Butler pointed out. But he comes back successful from that and goes back to the law firm. And he's sent, in 1916, he's sent to Berlin by the Rockefeller Foundation. And he's sent to Berlin this is the beginning of his connection to what's going to be the deep state. He is, as a man, like this brilliant ballroom dancer. He reads 5 books. He sleeps about 4 or 5 hours a night his whole life. He reads 3 to 4 books a week. He's a speed reader. Like I said, he spends lavishly because it's not his own money.
Singer. He bought up all the Broadway music.
He later sings with Churchill. I mean, when he gets together with Winston Churchill, he would buy music and sing him and Churchill together, oddly enough. Never would express any anger, but he would never laugh either. He'd just have this Irish impish grin that he would put on because he had a sense of humor. He just never laughed out loud, and he never showed any anger. But when he begins to go over to Berlin for the Rockefeller Foundation, it's really to suss out the intelligence of what's going on in what's going to be pre-U.S. entry into World War I. And that's why he goes over there. And Douglas MacArthur is like the chief of staff of what will be his division. He will then come back and be asked to bring the Fighting Irish Regiment, the same one, the 69th, over to France to fight the Huns. And that, my friend, is the beginning of his war years. He trains his men in the United States before he goes over there brutally, because he knows, from having been over there, he knows what we're getting into and how brutal it is. And he begins to train his men unmercifully, according to the men, and he will then take them to the Western Front in 1917, 1916, 1918, in that period. He goes over there, like I said, with a bunch of guys who are Irish, and one of them is a guy named Joyce Kilmer, who becomes his staff sergeant. Joyce Kilmer, who is another tough son of a bitch. These are all Irish guys, including Father Duffy. This is Joyce Kilmer, by the way. Now, Joyce Kilmer becomes one of the most famous poets in America. He is a scout for Donovan, and he crawls out into no man's land every night, comes back shredded with barbed wire. And one of the most heroic guys who worked under Donovan, there's a picture of Kilmer there. His middle name was Joyce. I think his first name was Ralph or something. But Kilmer is so heroic that they go to find him in the morning. He would crawl out into no man's land at night, come back with his uniform all shredded from the barbed wire. And they found him still on duty in the morning, laid out on a rock with his binoculars looking at the German lines. And they went up to him and they said, Kilmer, with Donovan, and he had a bullet right between the eyes. He was dead. And he was just laying there all night with a bullet in between his eyes. He was picked off by a German sniper. But he wrote one of the most famous poems of the era called Trees. And I've never seen something as pretty as a tree. That becomes one of the most famous poems in America. Having nothing to do with his war years, he becomes a published poet before this, and he teaches poetry in New Jersey at a college, and runs the newspaper there, becomes the editor of the poetry magazine. He then goes with Donovan to battle along with another guy. I don't know if you have a picture, or do you have a recording of that trees
Yeah, I have
thing?
trees. Yeah.
All right, let me hear that, because people know this. People know this poem.
I think that I shall never see.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree.
Now, it sounds like a simplistic poem, but it's really not. And in fact, these guys are uber Catholic, uber spiritual. And a lot of people ridicule that poem years later when poetry changes. But this was at the time. And years later, I remember learning it in school, in grade school in New York. Everybody had to learn that poem. And anyway, this is the type of people who went over there with Donovan. The other guy is Father Duffy. Now, Father Duffy is an Irish priest who is Canadian, who comes down, and he will go with Donovan almost as his personal cleric. He will become the most highly decorated cleric in American U.S. Army history. That is him over there. This guy, Father Duffy on the left, will go trench hopping in the middle of the night. He will carry wounded bodies back to behind enemy lines. He will be under fire. He will be wounded. He will get the Distinguished Service Cross. He will get a Bronze Star. He gets everything, and he doesn't have a gun. I mean, he's got weapons, but I mean, he's not an armed soldier, Eric, if you know what I'm saying. And he reads last rites. He goes trench to trench to buck up the men's spirits as the fighting's going on. And he is the right arm, the spiritual right arm. That's Father Duffy's statue, of course, in Times Square. That's Duffy Square in northern Times Square, up by like 45th between Broadway and 7th. I used to live on Broadway and 8th, right around the corner from that. That's the famous tickets booth underneath those stands. That's a statue to Father Duffy that was put there. Yeah, and that's him in his battle thing there that he'd have going on with the trench coat and the Bible. Very spiritual Catholic man. And again, the left hand of William Donovan is Father Duffy. The right hand is Kilmer. Now you say to yourself, where did I hear the name Kilmer before? Yes, indeed. He is a distant second cousin of the man who played Jim Morrison in The Doors, Val Kilmer.
Wow.
Isn't that weird? You talk about American history. I mean, and Val's father, he portrayed a character named Jim Morrison, and Jim Morrison's father was an admiral in the U.S. Navy in Vietnam. So anyway, after the war, after the OSS's run, Hollywood makes 3 giant movies. One is Cloak and Dagger with Gary Cooper. Another one is OSS with Alan Ladd. And the third one is 13 Rue Madeline with James Cagney. The scripts are reviewed by him. There's the Cagney one. That's the worst one. And he threatened Donovan. He threatened Hollywood to go nuclear on that film. The other 2 he liked. They reviewed the scripts together.
Well, Fritz Lang is an amazing director.
Fritz Lang, yeah. Lily Palmer, great actor. These are real movies, by the way, people. These are very, very good movies of the OSS. Now, we're going to get into the OSS eventually, but these were movies celebrating the success of the OSS, which had a lot of success, some failures, but they put together a group that is unbelievable. This is before the CIA, obviously. So he goes to this Battle of St. George, October 14th, October 15th, 1918, Donovan, and he is given for heroism, the Croix de Guerre. And he, along with a sergeant he has, the 2 of them are awarded this medal, and the sergeant is not given the medal. It's only given to Donovan, and Donovan insists that the sergeant get the medal, and the sergeant is not given the medal because he is Jewish. So Donovan says, I'm not accepting the medal unless you give it to both of us. And the French, of course, go, all right, if you're going to be like that, going full Dreyfus on us, we'll give you both the medal. He will eventually get just a list, just so you understand who this guy is. He will eventually get the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Distinguished Service Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, the National Security Medal, the Mexican Border Service Medal. These are the top 4, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. No man in Army, U.S. military history has ever gotten all 4 of these. And this is who this guy is. World War I Victory Medal, Army of Occupation of Germany Medal, and a bunch of other medals that I've never heard of. But the Medal of Honor he will get after the war.
And that's his uniform, how they lay out, so you could see the order of precedence.
Right. Okay.
Of them.
Yeah. They go to in New York City. They have 2,000 veterans show up for him to get the. It's more like 4,000 veterans show up. This is after the war, to get the presentation of the Medal of Honor, which he refuses to accept on behalf of the men who were left behind in France underneath the white crosses, resting, as he says, and the men who luckily were able to get home. And he refuses to the boys who are not here, the boys who are resting under also under white crosses, and also those who were lucky enough to get here. He refuses. This is an earlier medal. This is not the Medal of Honor.
No. But this is important because that's Blackjack Pershing putting it on MacArthur. The guy on the right is Donovan. So that's the company that he's keeping.
Oh, no. That's his level. Yeah, I mean, him and MacArthur are close friends, but they're also not
competitive.
Allies. Competitive. Let me put it that way. Right.
Sure.
Right. So he goes into this battle. And he will not cover his insignias, Eric. He leads his men into battle, and he wants the men to see it. He doesn't give a shit about the Germans seeing it. And every sergeant and lieutenant, he's a lieutenant at the time, every one of them tell him, you got to cover your insignias so the snipers don't kill you. And he says they're not going to kill me, first of all. And it's more important that the men see my medals, that I'm leading them, than the Germans shooting me for seeing the medals. So he refuses to cover them up and leads these men into battle, machine gunning, I don't know how many Germans to death, and killing his X amount of generals. This is a fighting lieutenant, doesn't want to even get promoted because he doesn't want to move up the ranks. He's a major and then a lieutenant. He doesn't want to go above lieutenant colonel, for Christ's sakes, because he doesn't want to get moved out. In fact, Leslie, the poet, they wanted to promote him, and he refused the promotion because he didn't want to leave Donovan's side as his staff sergeant. I mean, these guys came together from New York, Eric, as a group. They did not want to be broken up.
You mean Joyce?
Joyce, I'm sorry. What did I say?
Leslie.
Oh, Kilmer. I was thinking of, yeah. I think his name is Leslie Joyce Kilmer. I'm sorry. But Joyce Kilmer, right. He did not want to get a promotion either. And he wanted to stay with his men. So in 1918, there's an armistice, November 11th, obviously 1918. And what happens with Donovan? Well, he doesn't come home. He is sent to, this is where it gets even more interesting. He is sent to Russia to see what's going on in the Russian Revolution for different interests in the United States, again, to gather intelligence. For the Morgan banking interest, from the Rockefeller interest, they send him over to play Siberia. And he goes to Siberia and to find out what we have interests with the whites. Our banking interest and our real estate interest and our investments is with the Tsar and his family and the white Russians. And we're not down with the commies, and there's a civil war going on. So they send over Donovan to see what's going on, to see, are we going to lose everything here in Russia? And he realizes that things are falling apart. And he comes back and tells J.P. Morgan that the communists are going to win this thing. And this is in the middle of the civil war that's going on across Russia. He goes to Siberia. He sees certain losses, and they're worried about them making a special treaty with the Germans and communism spreading. And they are not wrong, and he sees this at the very, very birth of communism, Eric. He sees this at the very beginning, and he meets with a guy later named Stalin. He will meet with a guy named Adolf Hitler in 1923. He meets Hitler. I mean, he meets these guys before they're famous. He meets Mussolini even before he comes to power. He meets Hitler before he comes to power. And he walks away from meeting Hitler, and they compare him and Hitler compare war notes of being gassed, because he was gassed also, Donovan. He was shot up, as was Hitler. And this is not the Hitler of later. So this is just, political operative Hitler trying to be a politician.
A veteran. He was a veteran.
Yeah. So they compare notes, and Hitler tells him his entire Mein Kampf view of the world that will later become the essence of Mein Kampf. And he walks away and he says, I didn't know if he was a crackpot or a serious guy that I should fear for the rest of my life. Like it's right on the edge. He just goes, I don't know if he's just some flaky nut or some guy who's going to pull this off. And he goes and meets with Mussolini, and he goes around, and he is going everywhere in the world to report back to our military about the armies and militaries of these other countries, Eric, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. Because the Italian army was a laughingstock before this. And he goes over and he meets Mussolini, and Mussolini is sizing him up. And Hitler never forgets him, because Hitler and him will later become arch nemesis in World War II. Hitler will yell out Donovan's name in Berlin when certain events happen through the OSS. Hitler will know that this was Donovan, and he becomes his arch nemesis, which is fascinating between the two guys. Mussolini lets him go and see his troops, see his military, see everything in North Africa where he's invaded Ethiopia, Eric, and he wants to see all this stuff so he can judge the strength of these armies, whether war is going to be successful for these companies back east, back in the United States, to see if their investments are threatened, who's going to win. There's a lot of reasons to gather this information.
Well, his medals are very important for this stuff. Because believe me, he's kind of doing the Audie Murphy thing. Obviously, Audie Murphy's later, but anybody that's that big of a war hero, they're all interested in meeting, because they fought in war. Hitler fought in war. Yep. And so those medals, that Congressional Medal of Honor, the other medals, that kind of is like an entry ticket to go see anybody in the world.
Oh, yeah. Everybody lets him in, and he just keeps the ribbon. He doesn't have the medals. He just keeps the top part you showed there. That lets him in the door everywhere. And he does that even in the OSS.
Well, what's funny about that, too, there's one trivial story I thought that was hilarious. He would go visit a bunch of generals or whatever on a base, and he would wear his uniform with only one medal.
Right, that's what I'm trying to say.
It's the only one that mattered. He's like,
yes. And he never pointed it out, but eventually they would see it, and they'd go, right through, sir. You'll go right through. Because later on he'll be a major general, but at this point he is a lieutenant colonel up until the very end. I mean, he's artificially made into
colonel at the end of the war.
Right, but they promote him to major general.
Right, that's later though. But yeah.
It was kind of artificial, because it was just merely a title, but it was a legitimate promotion. I mean, he retired as a major general, but lieutenant colonel throughout the war, absolutely. But he's wearing this thing, and he goes and sees all these different guys, which is kind of interesting. So in 1918, after he comes back from Siberia, 21, 22, he is given the job of assistant U.S. district attorney of the upper western region of New York State under the Coolidge administration. And he is a tough prosecutor, Eric. He's an assistant attorney general of the United States. And he goes up there, and what is his job supposed to be? To enforce the Volstead Act. And even though he's not an anti-drinker himself, he is Irish, he is sent up there to bust open and enforce prohibition, Eric. Okay? and he begins to enforce prohibition in Buffalo and Western New York State, which is a big region, with an iron fist. So it turns out that the mayor of Buffalo has a distillery that he hasn't closed. It turns out that there's a club called the Saturn Club, which is the upper crust club of Buffalo, the Saturn Club. They all have liquor in their lockers and everything else. He had busted a bootlegger who confessed to him that he was the liquor distributor for the Saturn Club, of which Donovan and his wife were members. This is the upper crust, like Beverly Hills Country Club of Buffalo. So he raids the country club, he raids this Saturn Club, and he arrests all the top people in Buffalo who you could imagine now hate his guts.
Off everybody.
Right, including his own wife, who never forgave him because she came from that world. He didn't. He didn't come from that world. He came from from working class Irish stock, and he just felt that they deserved it as much as the little guy did. Well, among the little guys, he becomes a folk hero now. Not that he wasn't before. He was already the most famous man in New York, William Donovan. He is now revered by working class people, and he is told that he should run for governor of New York State, which he eventually will. But there's some stops along the way. He, in 1922, 1924, he, like I said, he's a U.S. attorney for the Western District of New York, and he fights prohibition, and he's named. He moves to D.C. Look how handsome he is here, everybody. This is him. Look how handsome. He's got bright steel blue eyes. This dapper dresser, a poet, an actor, a great orator, and he moves to D.C. with his wife, where he literally becomes, in D.C., the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. And he becomes in charge of antitrust legislation and goes to the U.S. Supreme Court more than Alan Dershowitz has ever been to the Supreme Court. That's how often he was up there. And he's revered for his trips to the Supreme Court and his oration to the United States Supreme Court. And the press reveres him. And he gives them tidbits and morsels and gossip. And every single person, he's bigger than Lindbergh at this point. He's bigger than FDR. Who is not even on the stage yet politically. So, he's obviously under Coolidge. He's on a rocket to stardom politically. And what happens? Harding is president, and they have the Teapot Dome scandal. And they've got an attorney general named Doherty. And up until, I guess, Mitchell, under Nixon, Doherty was the gold standard of corrupt attorney generals. Doherty will be incarcerated, I think, and he was selling oil leases right out of the Attorney General's office under Harding. This will bring down the Harding administration, and then he is brought in as a cleaner-upper, Donovan, as an inscrutable. Actually, he was a de facto Attorney General because the actual Attorney General was kind of a figurehead. So he has a battle. In 1924, he begins a feud that will last the rest of his life. And that feud is with a guy who doesn't want to give up his new control of Washington, and that is J. Edgar Hoover. And they do not get along. This is a manly man versus a man who dresses as a woman. So here's Hoover ordering a dress, obviously, from Sears Roebuck. That's a famous phone call. And I asked that size 8, size 11, and do measurements, J. Edgar Hoover, box 283. So they don't get along. So Hoover is constantly spreading dirt to anyone who will listen in the press about the womanizing of Donovan, which you've said to me before, which wasn't true. The one about Truman's daughter-in-law, I think it was.
Right, but it comes into play later on. It's kind of important, I think. For what I love about him too is we're up to 3 presidents now, right? We've got Wilson. But his career, if you look at the number of presidents that he passed through, until Roosevelt, and then Roosevelt's like 4 presidents.
Well, no, we're not
it's-
even done with
I know.
done with Hoover. I mean, at this point,
we're not too Hoover.
at this point, he is the possible governor of New York because this other guy is going to leave and give up his seat. He becomes best friends with Hoover, who's running for president, not J. Edgar Hoover, the other Hoover, and he becomes his campaign manager. Here's Hoover, and is this Hoover right here? Or is this Harding?
This is Hoover.
Okay, yeah, this is Hoover. So he becomes the campaign manager for Hoover. And as I said last week, campaign managers end up being attorney generals. And there's a long history of this. That's why I was mentioning the Fox story with RFK Jr., that she was probably promised the CIA directorship. However, that being said, Hoover has his speeches written by Donovan, who is obviously an intellectual and erudite and can write and read. He not only that, he trains him. He brings in his personal trainer to physically exercise him as a man. And he lives with him, trains him. And Hoover says to him, when I win this, if I do win this, you obviously want to be Attorney General of the United States.
Well, he offered a vice presidency before that.
Yeah, he didn't want any part of that because that's a warm bucket of spit. But he does want to be, and is in that world, to be Attorney General of the United States. Mm-hmm. And that's even the people in the media are saying it, people in the press. I mean, that this is where he's going. There's also talk about him being president of the United States. So that's later, though, after the OSS stuff. So he wants to be Attorney General. He becomes best friends with Hoover, and Hoover wins the election. And Hoover calls him into the office and says, sadly, I have to stab you in the back and rip you off and screw you over. And he goes, what are you talking about? He goes, I can't give you the Attorney Generalship. And one of the most political, I mean, the press goes berserk. The press knows that this guy's supposed to be Attorney General, and he is not shy about talking to the press. He comes right out of the office with Hoover, and he just quotes Hoover verbatim, that Hoover is capitulating to Southern Democrats and the Klan, who will not allow a Catholic to become Attorney General of the United States. And Hoover says, I'm sorry, I got to give in to these people. I need them. And, you're a Republican, they're Southern Democrats, and you're Catholic, and they're the Klan. So I guess you know where the handwriting is. And he offers him the governor of the Philippines. And he doesn't want to go to the Philippines because that would put him off the playing field in D.C., Eric. You know what I mean? So, I mean, he becomes infuriated with Hoover. I mean, it is a real et tu brute on the part of Hoover. I mean, he literally runs his campaign and makes him the president of the United States. And
well, that's all he wanted was Attorney General, more than any other position.
I know. He loved being a prosecutor. And he loved doing it, but he made so many political enemies because he was Elliot Ness. Let's face it, it's like the Untouchables. He was raiding places, Chinese opium dens. He took like a Chinese guy and brought him into his Untouchables mob that he had up in Buffalo, his Untouchables police force, and he would physically kick in doors himself as a prosecutor with machine guns because he didn't care. He had fought against the Huns. He didn't give a crap. And he would go in there, guns blazing, and bust open these opium dens. And Buffalo at the time, close to Canada, was such a smuggling operation of opium and liquor coming through Canada that the Chinese were actually sending opium into their Chinatown in Buffalo, which is part of the drug operations that were going on up in Buffalo. So he wanted to be the Attorney General, and Hoover really screwed him over, which is really dark. But that was 1926. So he's just working his way through the presidents now, Eric. So 1926, Hoover, by 28, he's president, and the anti-Catholic thing, which is hard to believe. He was being touted as the first possible Irish American president. It will take another 40 years until JFK, until that actually happens, oddly enough.
Yeah.
1929, he opens up a giant law firm in New York. Despite the Depression, he makes millions and millions of dollars for himself, repping people like Mae West and Jane Wyman, who will later become Mrs. Ronald Reagan. He represents actresses for the most part. He has a lot of women friends. He has a lot of affairs. Women love this guy. 1932, he runs as a Republican to replace FDR as governor of New York. That's one of his, I think that was his acting coach. This is a famous, I forget her name, she's a famous actress from
Eleanor
England.
Robson Belmont.
The Belmont is who she marries, right? But she came from money before that. She was a British, she came from England originally, but a very famous American Broadway stage actress at the time. That was one of the ones who was, one of his affairs was with her. She was one who, this was, by the way, that was before he got married with her. So that's not on him.
Yeah, it was like the day before or something, right? It was his bachelor party. Like,
It was his last,
hey,
it was his, it was his last licks. By the way, that woman was born in 1879 in England. She lived till 1979 in New York.
Whew. She
lived through the punk rock. She loved Johnny Rotten. I mean, just to think about the length of this woman's life. Yeah, she loved the Sex Pistols. It's just crazy. I mean, dude, the length of these people's lives died in 1979, just so you know. Totally
so she
bizarre.
died 20 years after him.
Oh,
Literally.
yeah, but that's common
Crazy.
that a woman will die after
Yeah,
a
that's
man.
true.
But just to think that somebody from 1879 would be listening to Johnny Rotten in 1979 is kind of weird.
Charming guy.
Right. So anyway, so Donovan now tours Europe. This is where he gets back into meeting Hitler and Mussolini and everything that I was talking about before. And he begins to gather this intelligence because it becomes obvious that we are going to get eventually into World War II. And this is where it begins to get interesting because he now has, just so you know, there is no intelligence operation in the United States. It is, and he explains this, he says the president, FDR, receives thousands of pages every day that he can't possibly read. There's no presidential brief. There's no thing that's boiled down by the Central Intelligence Agency like there is today. He just gets random crap. And it's always from the military. It's always from, it's always from ONI. It's just military stuff. Like the Germans have a new 88. This is interesting. There's no.
Well, worse, that's where careers went to die at the time. They were not the best officers.
Yeah,
they were the washouts and burnouts, and they were sent into the intelligence group.
Yeah, they thought it was really a disgusting way to make a living, you know. And they sent the weasels there. A lot of the weasels begin to go there, and Donovan has the foresight to realize that he's befriended by Churchill and he's befriended by a guy named Ian Fleming, and Fleming will tell him how the British intelligence MI6 is run. Is this Fleming, by the way?
Yeah, as a lieutenant commander at the time.
Right, as a lieutenant commander, and Fleming will come back with him to DC and be the go-between between British intelligence and Churchill, and he models the OSS after British intelligence because we don't have a model. We don't have anything. We don't know how. He asks them, "What do you do? How do you work?" Nothing. We don't have anything. He begins to hire this guy who becomes his Sidney Gottlieb, this inventor guy who will come up with a lot of spy tradecraft stuff that nobody's ever seen before. He becomes his first Sidney Gottlieb CIA kind of a guy.
No, you called him Moriarty.
Moriarty, yeah. He's an interesting guy because he is the guy that comes up with the bat thing, you know, with putting the flammable things on bats,
which we've covered with now this.
Yeah. He's the guy that came up with it.
And then LeMay, and then David Ferry. Everybody likes the burning bats.
You know what it is and so did Donovan. He liked the burning bats too. Unfortunately, nobody could make it work. He tries. They dump these bats out of a plane with the stuff attached to the bottom, and the bats fall just like stones into the ground and die an unpleasant death. The guy's name was Lovell. Yes, I forget his first name, but he was
Stanley.
Stanley Lovell, yeah. And he will come up with things like injecting, now, because you'll see and hear the echoes of Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA and Fidel Castro when I tell you this. They tried to inject Hitler's vegetables with hormones so his mustache would fall out and his voice would raise to a high falsetto. Now, what does that sound like, people? It sounds like Sidney Gottlieb and Castro's beard. Unfortunately, they couldn't find where Hitler grew his vegetables, so they couldn't inject them with hormones. You know, they also came up with one of my favorite devices is that miniature crossbow, Eric, that I sent you a picture of.
Yeah, I've got multiple devices here. Hold on.
Right. The crossbow, that's the miniature crossbow. It's 1942 or something. I think he comes up with a miniature crossbow. But how about the gun on the glove? That one. That was interesting. That was developed by Naval Intelligence, actually. But the OSS used it to, and this is the double barrel cyanide gun, interestingly enough.
Why stop with one barrel?
You had to have two barrels. And he found a guy named Mo Berg, and Mo Berg goes to work for him behind enemy lines. Mo Berg was one of the smartest men in America. He will go to work. All these people, what he does, and we'll get into it next week, but what he does is he begins to assemble and hire. He's given a budget, unlimited budget. He works for nothing. Nobody gets paid. They take over some offices in D.C. He's named coordinator of information by FDR, who gives him a letter, just a letter signed by FDR saying, you know, you're coordinator of information, a one-page letter. Takes over some offices. And he said that at that time, the federal government was creating 2 new programs a week, two agriculture departments, 2 FDAs, two a week. That's how expansive under FDR. So anybody who went to FDR, he would just go, "Here's a letter. Go ahead, have a program."
He hated the New Deal. Hated it. He thought it was a communist takeover.
Well, he wasn't wrong. I mean,
so I'm just saying it's an interesting relationship.
But he cooperates with the Soviet Union because they're allies, and he tries to open an NKVD or whatever their pre-KGB intelligence unit. He goes to FDR to open up an office in D.C. for Soviet intelligence, and Roosevelt goes, "I can't do this," and he says, "Nah, come on." He says, "We'll have one in Moscow, and we're better at this than they are." In other words, he's thinking if I can get into Moscow, I could do more damage than they can do in D.C. That's how this guy thought. And Roosevelt loved him. Roosevelt loved this guy. He, like half of the schemes that Donovan came up with, or his men came up with, were harebrained schemes. But Roosevelt loved spying too. He loved the Ian Fleming stuff. He loved Churchill's connection to intelligence. And it's something the United States did not have.
Now, the bats came from Eleanor through FDR to him.
Yeah. Well, she knew the inventor or something. She's the one who recommended the inventor, who becomes his Moriarty, or as I said, Sidney Gottlieb, because he does invent a matchbook camera. He does have a scopolamine truth drug in its earliest days. Is this Augie?
This is Augie.
He tries it out. This is great. He brings in this low-level mobster, and they give him this scopolamine, which is supposedly their truth drug.
On a cigarette.
And Augie starts smoking it, and Augie starts telling the truth about how many people he's rubbed out and how he's working with Lucky Luciano and everything else. And this is where they get the idea to use mafia guys in the invasion of Sicily through this little Augie situation. They begin to use mobsters, and he has already hired bank robbers. He's hired safe crackers. He's hired male prostitutes. He's hired tons of professors. He hires everybody he thinks could be of interest or help to the U.S. war effort. And again, he errs not on the side of caution. He just throws shit to the wind and figures if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, which is what was necessary for this creation of the first U.S. intelligence, overall international intelligence unit in American history. There is ONI, as I've said, going back to the 1880s, but They specifically were small and dealt with naval and military stuff. You know what I mean? A lot of good they did at Pearl Harbor to show you how intelligent they were. I mean, they only had to deal with, guarding these ships, and they couldn't pull that off. So it becomes necessary and obvious to everybody that we need an intelligence unit for the United States.
A clearinghouse, I think he even said, because didn't he hired people checking weather patterns. Anyway, there's a ton of stuff that is coming up, right?
Yeah, and he's going to get into fighting behind enemy lines. I mean, he literally, now keep in mind, in 1943, he's like 61 years old. I mean, this is not the peak of his career. In fact, he wants to have a draft, not of 18 and 24-year-olds. He wants the draft to be 40-year-olds. He wants it to be 35 to 45. He says these kids are too young, and you're killing too many of them. I saw too many wasted lives in World War I. You wiped out an entire generation of youth. It's a waste of time. They don't know what they're doing. It's hard to train them. Let's get men 35 to 45. Now, he hires women in OSS. He has Mary Bancroft. He has Dulles running for him.
Julia Child.
Julia Child. I mean, he has all kinds of, he has later Sterling Hayden, the actor, will work for him, and playwrights, all kinds of him. There's a great story of him and Hemingway rolling into Paris the day they liberate Paris together on the Jeep with Hemingway going to the Ritz with him and going on the roof and shooting off a machine gun. Hemingway on the back of a Jeep, them going into the Ritz to the bar and just drinking themselves into a stupor, although he didn't really drink. Hemingway did. So that was weird. But yeah, I mean, he used the Soviet intelligence as an ally because they were both fighting the Germans, Eric. But in the back of his mind, everybody knew that they were going to be our next enemies. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the great things that he does is he specializes really in the Bosnian area of Bulgaria and that region. And one of his greatest accomplishments is going from king to leader, Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, Macedonia, goes over to the Greek side. And he gets these people to agree to stall for time in agreeing to be on the Nazi side. And he says to them that I represent President Roosevelt, and this was before we're in the war.
This is before he got the letter, too.
Yeah.
That's the ballsy part.
Yeah. He goes around to see these world leaders, and he says, we will come into this war. And if you agree to side with the Nazis right now before we come in, it's going to be the worst decision you've ever made for your nation's history. And they go, what? I didn't know that. So he says, I'm asking you to wait. And because they agreed to wait, he stalls them. And the stall is enough to delay the Nazi attack on the Soviet Union. And that delay, whether it was 5 weeks or 4 months or whatever the amount was, forced the Nazis to get bogged down in the Russian winter. And that is probably the biggest unheralded, uncredited thing in Donovan's career. They had the help and advice of others, but it goes completely unheralded that he did this himself. He physically,
without a letter and at risk. The State Department were going to charge him.
Oh, yeah.
The Logan Act.
The Logan Act, yeah, because he was actually, again, nobody knows one hand from the other in the government, so nobody knows who's representing who. But he's running around Europe meeting the heads of state, and the people in the State Department going, what's with Donovan? I mean, Donovan's not an obscure guy. I mean, this is like Lindbergh, who's meeting with Hitler. This is the opposite side of the coin. Lindbergh's going over there. Lindbergh is like John Glenn, like a famous astronaut. And here's Donovan going over there, who is the most famous soldier in American history, going over and meeting with Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, and everybody else, and who is he representing? He's gathering intelligence and funneling it to FDR, at this point. And then eventually they sign a letter and they create this ad hoc organization. That's the precursor to OSS. And that's where we are right now at this point in the story. His code number is 109, by the way. And there's a guy who's 110, and that'll be Alan Dulles, who will appeal later in part 2. But Dulles works under him, so just to keep that in mind. He doesn't dislike Dulles. He just thinks he's ineffectual. Dulles will later fuck up almost everything with this Operation Sunshine debacle, where he tries to make a peace deal with the Nazis in Italy and really offends the Soviets, and it sets us back. There's Dulles who will have the affair with Mary Bancroft, and everybody's having sex with everybody else, but not to hold it against Alan Dulles. But
hey, perks. No.
But he wanted to be the first Irish president in the United States, and he was on track to do that. Except there was so much prejudice that apparently he couldn't do it, because even Kennedy had prejudice against him. There was a guy who worked for him, one of his agents, will later become a very controversial Supreme Court justice named Arthur Goldberg. Later UN ambassador to the UN, Johnson crony. We'll get into him next week. So you got this Mo Berg thing. You got Arthur Goldberg there with him. There is information that they have of a A-10 two-stage rocket that the Germans are building, and they're about 5 to 6 weeks away from building this rocket that could hit New York. A two-stage rocket, by the way. They are involved in the bombing of the heavy water plant up in the Scandinavian region and taking out the heavy water for a German nuclear bomb. The success of the OSS is really breathtaking. Again, this will eventually end up in a telegram to him that Roosevelt is dead, and he realizes that he's got to deal with a guy who hates his guts, and that is Truman. And Truman hates him, and Truman fears him as a political rival. And Truman says when he sees him, there is no way that I am ever authorizing a spy agency that can spy on the American people domestically. Now, this comes from J. Edgar Hoover. This is not Truman, who 2 years later will sign the National Security Act authorizing the CIA. He just didn't want Donovan doing it. And Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, was releasing all kinds of smears on Donovan to get him off the playing field of battle, and because nobody feared Donovan more than J. Edgar Hoover, because J. Edgar Hoover was a corrupt, weird dude, and Donovan was a war hero and an American football hero, and the best we had to offer in terms of honesty and diligence, and a law scholar and law firm and everything else that was good about the country. Hoover feared Donovan more than any other man in the country.
Yeah. And we'll get into it. Truman hated him too, because Truman was a failed businessman and he was an incredibly successful lawyer, and on down the line.
Well, Truman was corrupt, and he was also, a cantankerous Biden-like figure with many similarities that we pointed out in other episodes to Joe Biden. A lot of skeletons in his closet, a lot of corruption, came from a machine politician out of Kansas City. Nevertheless, he will create the CIA in 1947. He will then regret it day after the Kennedy assassination, will write a famous op-ed that he regrets having created it, and Dulles will visit him, urging him to withdraw that editorial, which he doesn't do. And Dulles calls up the magazine and says, I'm authorized to tell you Truman wants you to withdraw that. And then he never had Truman's permission to say that. So more will be revealed in episode 2, my friend.
All right.
Well, this is going to take us up. We're going to go eventually in part 2, and then we're going to go eventually to the door of the CIA and then into Dulles. But you need this information to get from point A to point B, I think.
Perfect. And we'll go back a little and then go over to next week. But we have super chats that we can go over, which is always a good thing.
Okay.
Lady Freddie wrote in saying, last week I started unsubscribing disappointing channels. Now I've moved to first time block. I get it now. Also, thanks for all you guys do.
Wait, what's first time block?
I'm not sure. I don't know if she's following your Twitter or X habits, or I don't know.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I'm not sure. Booker Dog coming in hot, $99. comment.
Oh, okay, Booker. Let us know who you are. Sometimes I don't know. People come up to me and they say, "I'm Dog Boy 389." I go, "I don't know who Dog Boy 389
Right. Well,
is, bro." I'm
some
sorry.
stand out, some
Just let
don't.
us know who you are so we can say hello to you.
But yes, we definitely look forward to meeting you, and we will be meeting people in Dallas. I look forward to that. On that note, by the way, Mark,
What?
one ticket you said to me yesterday.
Yeah, she said there's one ticket left.
So, folks,
no, this is not the virtual tickets.
No, virtual tickets are unlimited as far as I know.
Unlimited, right.
But there's a link in the chat. You could be the lucky last ticket.
Oh, that's
owner,
true. That is true.
But there is still a link in there, and you never know. Somebody else might cancel. They might have a waiting list. Go ahead and try. But definitely get the virtual ticket. This thing's selling out.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good gift, too. I mean, you could give the virtual ticket to your kid in college and say, look, doofus, just watch this. And, just the whole dormitory may end up watching it on your kid's TV up in whatever cockamamie left-wing Ivy League school he's going to.
Actually, buy the download, too. So hopefully they can keep it forever and keep playing it year after year. They can have a tradition. David Wells, the British poet Robert Groves, wrote the book Goodbye to All That about his experience in World War I. That's right. A good read.
Yeah, that's right.
Drive-by Shouting. That's a good name. Ever hear of the U.S. Marshal Bass Reeves? Amazing story. He chased down outlaws in the territory and is relatively unknown. Judge Parker said there is no law west of Kansas City and no God west of Fort Smith.
I don't know.
And he is relatively unknown, including here.
Yeah, he's relatively unknown, relatively speaking.
And Jews nuts, okay, stumbled across AUS due to a glitch in the matrix, i.e. YouTube algorithm, in last month. Binge watching episodes like crazy. Stories and the art of storytelling is phenomenal. Love LBJ episodes. What a great character. Come on, Bobby.
You could buy the glass from Ziggy that says, "Come on, Bobby," the drinking glass.
That's right. There are links inside of the description. Gary Bostic is saying, great job. And I'm sorry, Gary has been a member for 1 month.
Wow.
When you're a member, it kind of comes up in highlights. If each month you get a chat that's highlighted. Pasha Moyer, another great episode. Never a dullest.
Wait a minute. I see what he's doing. That's like a pun or something.
It is.
I'm at the Norton Art Gallery, by the way, currently here, the Norton Gallery of Art. And back of me, you could see some of the paintings. I don't know what happened to the guards. They just kind of disappeared.
Shh. We're on a time limit, Mark, before they come back around. Court Clerk. Looking forward to meeting you all in Dallas. We'll be there at Lancer. You all will be willing to do a group walkthrough of Dealey Plaza. It would be so cool to explore.
Yeah, we're going to walk with 69 people. Think about what you're talking about, bro. We're going to walk with 79 people going, all right, stay together, people. Let's everybody keep moving. Let's go. We're walking. Let's everybody by the picket fence for a group photo. Thank you down in front. Look out for the snipers.
Yeah,
it's not really workable.
Yeah, we can't be doing that. But to finish out, we've started doing this. We did this last Tuesday. We did this Friday to celebrate our birthday, which was this past Sunday. For the rest of the month, we're giving away 1 free month on locals using the code birthday. And at the end of the shows, we're going to locals with Oswald, showing us the way and answering tips that are there and just going exclusive on locals. I have a pinned chat with the code. It's also in the description here. It's in the description on Rumble. And ideally, I hope you all follow us there. You can subscribe for free. You get a month for free where you get everything. But even after the month, if you don't wish, that's fine. You still get to watch it and hang out. And I hope to see you there.
Hope to see you there because that's where we're going to be doing our special project November 22nd. So you'll be hearing more about that through Hunley's operation.
All right. So everybody, the number should be going down right now. Everybody should be heading to locals. I'm going to play the outro. And
we're going to locals. We're going to locals. We're heading.